Good evening, my friends. We've all just suffered a terrible loss. A lot of people wouldn't understand that if they didn't know him and if they didn't experience what he did for so many of us. For the last 7 years, he and I spoke, I'd say it averages out an hour a week, and he spent time with me, and he had very little time because right up until he was gone, he worked. He did everything he always did. And it never left me, no matter how close we got. Holy cow, I'm talking to Andrew Vachss every time I talked with him. But he spent time with me. He helped me with my writing. He actually helped me on a few cases that I worked on. And he helped me personally. And he never asked for anything in return. One time he gave me a job to do. The first time I was so excited to do a job for Andrew Vachss. Of course, I was worried what would happen if I didn't do a good enough job. But I did. And first thing he said was, tell me where to send the bill. And I said, yeah, when I send you the bill for the writing lessons, we can talk about that. I wanted to tell you guys a little bit in this video about my relationship with him because writing won't do it. I'll try to keep it brief, but I can't promise. And I'm going to be putting up another video as to what my intentions are. And believe it or not, he and I actually spoke about the possibility of this occasion. Back in the 80s, I used to own and teach at a martial arts school. I know many of you are saying you look way too young for that, but it's true. I was young at the time. I used to tell my students, I don't want you picking up those martial arts magazines or those ridiculous books. We're trying to build a foundation for you, and I don't want your head filled with garbage. I made two exceptions with that. They were allowed to read books by Mark McYoung and by Peyton Quinn. And later on, I would recommend to them that they read Andrew Vachss. I mentioned Mark for a reason many of you already know. I read Strega when a student gave it to me. I finished teaching about 9:30, and I started reading at about 10 o'clock and was in my dojo until 2 a.m. And I just couldn't put the book down. And it struck me, not only was it great crime fiction, but it was true. As fate would have it, and the world is such a small place sometimes, many years later, I see Andrew Vachss on Facebook. And I send him a friend request, he friends me, and I read his posts, and that's Andrew, just like his writing. And I'd read most of his books, not all. We started corresponding and speaking on Facebook, just casually. And that went on for a while. And then one day he asked me on Facebook, have you ever read Everybody Pays? And I actually hadn't. And he would never ask anyone to buy his books. And he said, there's a story that reminds me of you. I think you would identify with the character. I'm curious as to your impression of the story. And of course, I said, well, I'll go buy it right away. And he said, well, you can pick it up at the library. And I said, Andrew, it's probably the only book of yours I don't have. I'll be happy to pick up a copy. And I not knowing which one it was, it ended up being the short story Mission. But not knowing which one it was, he basically said, tell me which one, tell me when you get to it. And I thought it was the Concrete Puppy at first because I'm a big animal person, as many of you know. Actual animals, not Mark McYoung, although I don't mind him either. And I was flattered, stunned that he would equate me, or I would remind him of a character that he wrote. And that started me writing. I actually had written a horror novel back in the 90s, making that a short story. My cousin worked for a publishing house. I gave her the only copy, excited that she wanted to read it. She called me and said um, it was going to be published. She had a stroke and the manuscript was lost. Fortunately, she survived, but that was it. The reason I mention that is Andrew had a very similar experience in his life. There were many parallels between us, and he pointed out that his agent died just before his first novel was published, and there was some similarities in the experience. Well, I decided to try writing again, and I wrote a short story. It put it on Amazon, and I wrote on his one of his posts. I wrote this, and I posted the link after reading and your comments to me about Mission, and he didn't respond. So I'm like embarrassed, and I'm thinking to my Jesus, everybody must approach this guy about writing stuff. And but a day goes by and he pops up, and his comment was, wait, you wrote this? And he said, I don't have Kindle, but I will pick one up to read your story. And of course, again, being flattered, I said I'd be happy to send it to you. And he said, send it to my website, and I did. My emails are signed with my name and my cell phone number automatically. And a fine June morning, maybe I think it was June 5th or 6th, we're talking 7 years ago, I'm walking out the door, and my cell phone rings private. And I never answer private, and I, for some reason, did. And John Curley. And I said, yeah, Andrew Vachss. And I was shocked. And maybe he said, did you forget that? I said, yeah, I signed my email. He goes, do you mind me? No, of course I don't mind you call. And we talked, and he went through my short story with me paragraph by paragraph, and he pointed out when I did something right and when I did something wrong. And I would gush like a pre-teenage child being given a video game when he said, this was good. And I'd say, really? And he said, listen, if every time I tell you you did something good, you stop to ask me if I'm telling you the truth, I don't have enough time for that. So do you want me to help you, or do you want me to stroke you? So I said, please help me. And we went through it. We talked for about 2 hours, and we talked about experiences that we'd had. And he said, we will talk again. And we did. He suggested to me that I send my story in for Protectors 2, one of the stories I wrote. And he took the time out when Tom Pluck sent him an email to read the email to me and tell me, he said, you seem, because I would always doubt how well I could write, and he said, you seem to have some questions as to your ability. He said, now you have me, and you have this kid who's also a published writer and an editor, and we're both saying that you can write. So let's move past that, shall we? He would take the time out. I have a self-deprecating sense of humor, and I would say to him, well, you know me, Andrew, strong as an ox and almost as smart. And he would say, you don't need to do that, son. You're a handsome guy. You're very bright. You don't need to do that. And I said, it's a reflexive thing, and humor's always been like a crutch for me, I guess. But he would take the time out to do things, to point things out like that for me. We shared experiences. I am not Superman, but there have been a few times where I've gone into places and walked out with children, and one of them had happened just recently, before this girl was sold. And we were talking about this sound that they make when you get them out, this sort of wailing, reserved, awful, pathetic sound, and how hard it was to hear. About a year and a half later, it was New Year's Eve day, and I had sent him my latest short story. It was always so cool that I could send my writing to Andrew Vachss, and he would look at it and talk to me about it. And in the story, the characters had to walk into a room and threaten someone with shotguns. It was done. The story was based on an actual experience that I had. And I basically had them go into this room, and they made their point by racking the shell into the chamber. And I think I wrote something that there's no sound that will bring quiet to a room like the sound of a shotgun shell getting racked into a chamber. And he called me. I will never forget this. He said to me, "You wrote something that is absolute genius in that story." And I was, "Please tell me." And he said, "Well, you at one time used and dispelled that bullshit Hollywood nonsense about the shotgun shell. Everybody, it's." And I laughed, and he said, "What did you base that on?" I said, "Yeah, that was," and I told him what had happened, and he laughed, and he said, "That was brilliant." And I said, "I'm sorry, Andrew, the phone is not, could you say that again?" He said, "It was brilliant." And I'm sorry, one more time, and then he stopped, and he said, "I am not going to keep telling you that you're brilliant." But that was, and we both laughed, and um, because in the next paragraph I wrote that there's no professional that would walk into a room with an unloaded gun. I mean, think about that, guys, which is obvious. Um, but he said to me, "Not me, not Spillane, not Parker, not Chandler. None of us have done something like that, and you did it." And I said, "Andrew, that's some pretty important company you're putting me in there." And he said, "It's the truth. And then he said, "By the way, this, and this was wrong. Fix it." And I said, "Of course. You know, I'm one of those people. I guess you could do something brilliant, and then the next minute you're trying to get out of a car with your seatbelt still on." He gave me advice when it came time to publish my novel. I got an actual offer from a publishing company, and it was basically awful. It was indentured servitude. And he suggested to me that I publish by myself. And I said, "Andrew, if you publish a story, 500,000 people will buy it. And if I publish a story, my 3 friends will buy it." And he basically said, "It's a great, all you have to do is work a little harder. You won't have to sell your soul. It's really something that you should consider." And he even looked at the contract that I was sent, and told me, "No, no, don't do this." He advised me about a stalker that I had. Um, you know, perhaps perhaps the thing that he did for me that had the most impact on me was during the pandemic. I'd come across this television show on Netflix. I've debated talking about this, and by the way, naturally, anything that there were things that he and I discussed that would never be repeated by me, and there were things that he wouldn't mind. Um, and I want you guys to have a little bit of insight into my relationship with him, and to understand that, and that'll be made more clear to you the next video. So I see this show called Bloodline, and if you haven't seen it, it's a superb show, and you basically have the good brother, for lack of a better word, and the bad brother. All you know about the bad brother in the beginning is that he was horrifically abused as a child. He leaves and he comes back and he sets the whole family basically on fire. He's causing them to beat each other's throats, and he's an evil person. He's a drug trafficker. He kills people, and the good brother knows that they're spiraling down to a point where one of them is going to kill the other. And the mother asks the good brother, and again, I don't equate myself with the good brother, I'm using that for lack of a better term. The mother, crying, kept telling him, "You have to try to help your brother." Some of you may know this, some may not, but my younger brother is a violent sociopath, and he had abused his girlfriend, whom we call our sister-in-law, for years. And his violence extended itself towards the children, and we took them in and sheltered them, and entered into a battle with him in and out of family court. He violated the orders of protection against my niece, my nephew, and my sister-in-law so many times. 9 times in a 5-day time frame, and they were building the fourth, so there were only 3 police precincts on Staten Island at the time, and it was in every precinct that he had a detective team looking for him. And that was a horrible time. But shortly after, um, he ended up in prison where I helped put him. The economy collapsed in '09 and shortly thereafter, and a lot of horrible things happened, I just kind of shoved it aside. Well, going back to the television show, the guy, good brother, talks to the mother. Mother's asking him to save his brother, and he gets into his truck, and in the rearview mirror he sees his younger brother, but as a child, and he turns around and he screams "fuck you" at him repeatedly, the image of his brother as a child. And when I saw that, it made everything that I'd gone through rush back, and I don't think I talked for maybe 2 days. I tried talking to people about it, and out of desperation, I called him. And we talked for a long time. He said, well, why was he saying "fuck you" to his younger brother? And I said, no, that's easy, Andrew. It was "fuck you" for being what you are. "Fuck you" for making me do what I have to do. And, basically, "fuck you" for doing this. And he said, that's good. Correct. He said, but there's a "fuck you" for someone else that you left out. And he said, uh, whether you're understanding it or not, your father made your brother into what he was. And in that case, so that everybody knows, and Andrew's described the different types of abuse, my father was not a bad man. And a lot of times parents make mistakes, but nevertheless, it was him that was responsible for that. And my brother made choices. You all know the points that he's made that we adhere to. He is responsible for his choices, but there is no question that my father set him on the path. And he said, there should be a "fuck you" for your father in there. And you find that difficult because you still love him. And I said, yeah. And he said, and you claim you're not a child of the secret, son, but we'll discuss another time how it would be impossible for that to have occurred in your household, even if it wasn't extended to you. And you were not abused as a child. And I laughed and I said, yeah, let's unpack that another time, He also told me, he said, what else about this? And I said, I don't know, Andrew. How do you feel about a guy that would have actually killed his brother? At that point, by the way, my younger brother was threatening to burn my home down with my family in it. And when he made threats like that, you had to pay attention to it. If you didn't, it was your error. And he said, what would you think of someone who allowed your brother to do the things that he did and took no action? And I said, well, I wouldn't think much of a man like that. I wouldn't keep company with him. And he said, well, there's your answer. He said, men like you always feel, he said, you were supposed to be at 14 able to go through the grieving process of losing your father, and you were supposed to be miraculously an adult and help your brother, who, from what you told me, many people that he looked up to tried to help him, and you feel responsible for that. And I said, I do. And he said, why? Wouldn't you think that's crazy if I told you someone else said that? And I said, yeah. And if that sounds familiar, he said the same thing to Oprah Winfrey during the interview. So we talked about everything in the time that I knew him. He even talked to me about dying, if you read that last post. And it's an absolutely awful hole inside of me. And I know a lot of you guys are going through that. There was never anything the man asked from me. There was one thing that I promised him I would do. I knew that I just knew, and it would make sense to you, that he wanted to know that people were going to continue his work when he was gone. And he never asked. He never said anything like that. It was he would instruct me about child protection. We would discuss it for hours. And all he wanted was for people to continue on after him, to know that it was still going to continue. And I promised him, I said to him one day, early on, when we were talking about it, and we were discussing death, and no one knows how long they have. And I said, well, you better not plan on going anywhere. But what I can tell you is, until it's my time, I will keep working on this cause. I said, please don't go anywhere, because I'm not you, and I have a lot more to learn from you. And there were times not a lot, but if you look on YouTube, I have a little channel there, and I had a book signing, and I appeared on a news show, and I've done a friend's podcast a few times. And I would call him and say, hey, this guy wants somebody to come on, this show, and he'd say, you do it. And I'd be like, you do it. And he would tell me, you can do this. As a matter of fact, when I did the book signing, he said, yeah, John, that was actually great, but maybe you should have talked about your book a little bit more, because I did a reading from the book, and then I spent the rest of the time talking about child protection. I'm going to post another video. I've talked long enough, and if I haven't made you fall asleep, I'm going to post another video, and I'm going to tell you what he and I discussed should happen, what I should do if he moved on, and I'm going to explain what I have planned and invite all of you to participate. I can't say it enough. I'm not him, and no one is. But anybody could read his work and know what it is that we have to do. And if he was there for you like he was there for me, or if you just want to stop children from being abused, if you want to do your part, then there's things that we can do. It's been a rough couple of years, and this is the icing on a very bitter cake. He'd want to know that we were doing his work. So in a day or so, I will post the second video. I appreciate you staying with me and listening. I just couldn't put that in anything, a few paragraphs on some blog, and I just want these people, you people, our people, to know what my relationship was with him and how much he meant to me and what it is that I intend to do. So I invite you, make comments. I'm not allowed to go live until February, by the way. I guess after Facebook prison, there's Facebook probation. You can make comments, and if you have any questions, ask them and I will answer. I'm going to post this in both of the child protection rooms and on my wall. And I look forward to working with everybody and keeping him alive through his work. I'll catch you guys later.